for a moment and listen. Because here, among the stones and the statues, among the images and the effigies, there are voices. You see, for me, it's the people make the place, and the place the people. And somewhere between the grave and the steeple, lives are played, like puppets on a stage. And the set can lift them like a moon hung on a branch, or collapse around them, turning drama into farce. Come back with me now to a time when this place was surrounded by fields and farms, and the town was a tangle of this church and rows of stone cottages tied up with ribbons made of streams. Out to the west was a farm. The land stretched from the cliff edge to the woodland where the road is now, where Joseph measured his worth in hectares and married Anne with the conviction of a man who knew his way. They had fields for sheep and cattle and were happy. They had an orchard and healthy vegetable beds and were happy. They had a stone farmhouse and a stable for the horses and a coop for the chickens and a sty for the pigs, and they were happy. They were happy. Anne knew she was happy. Joseph had told her so. So the days she was drawn to the waves and felt their pulsing pull, in a strange, almost motionless dance she would stay, as though in a trance, and hours would pass. Hours. It was only the dull draw of an empty belly that would turn her back to battle gravity up to the farm, lost in her own head. It was nothing he did, nothing he said, and if you glanced through the pane of the window, missed the blue, it was true. They were happy. In the days before Wi-Fi, or teletext, or Derek, you forecast the weather with a study of the sky, of the habits of the birds, of Uncle Bill's aching knees and the hairs on the back of your neck. But even if Anne had been privy to the plan of the cloud's testosterone-filled collision, would she still have made her decision to head to the sea as the sky darkened in the east and the wind kept sweeping? The ocean grew holes as Anne watched from the drift line. Burgeoning pattern of quickening drops, and it took her a moment to shift from her daydream, to turn from the seashore and run to the rocks, where a jutting out ledge made a crumbling cave. And she sheltered beneath it, resolved just to wait, but the waves and the storm hadn't made Anne blind. And in some stretching crevice of her mind, she knew, as you do, the true nature of these untrustworthy cliffs, of the feckless rock, and she bit her lip and weighed up the risk. A rumble from the cliffs or the sky forced her hand, and she pulled off her shoes to run across sand away from the farm, to the easiest path and the shelter of woodland that wasn't too far. It was here, in the embrace of a benevolent oak, that Jack's dog found her. He barked, and his wet tail wagged, and shining his beam and waving his flag, he brought Jack running to find a trapped sheep. But it wasn't a sheep that was trapped. They rushed through the storm and stopped at his cottage. Anne stood in the doorway. She dripped all the tears of the storm on his stones, and Jack, he was wordless. He peeled off her clothing. He just kept on peeling right down to her bones. Their love, it was urgent, unhurried. It sang, yet was silent. It was primal, essential. It was something elemental, and lying together in front of a freshly laid fire, they heard the storms cease. It was quiet. There was peace. The deluge was the start of a feverish affair that existed outside of Anne's life, separate, divided, so right, but misguided, and Joseph was ignorant. Something vexed him. He sensed the distance, but spring consumed him as the farm was his mistress. Days were long and filled with toil. Anne lived in the clouds and Joseph the soil. His imagination could only fail to stretch as far as her betrayal, and so she was free. Their affair ran loose through fields of maize, through woodland barns, even salty caves that reeked of seaweed, briny, hostile. Their lust undampened, ardour unspent, both of them filled with unknowing intent. They would not stop. They could not stop. But then another winter rolled around, and Anne found herself inside, looking out. With shorter days and less opportunity came greater frustration, and after such intense elation where her heart had swelled to welcome him in, she was left bereft, a concave cavern in her chest. Days turned to weeks where she hadn't seen Jack, and the glowing embers had faded to black, when one night changed the course of Anne's life. Joseph came running, calling his wife. The cliff had crumbled, the wall collapsed. They needed to make their boundary secure. They were frantic, unsure, but with planks and hammer and nails they ran. It was dark at the cliff edge. Anne could hear the water below in a mirthless jeer at her husband, bent double with effort. One wrong step. That's all it would take. One simple mistake. A vision flashed in Anne's eyes, smashed in her mind, and she saw herself and Jack, with fields for sheep and cattle being happy, with the orchard and healthy vegetable beds being happy, in the stone farmhouse with its stable for the horses, coop for the chickens, and sty for the pigs being happy. She could be happy. And this tide of joy flooded her heart and sweat through her arms, and she smiled as she felt his body fall away from her hands. A terrible accident. The family and neighbours shook their heads and tucked their children tighter in their beds and warned each other, stay away from the edge. Anne wore black and stayed hidden away, in case she couldn't hide the brightness inside. After the funeral, it took the mourners hours to leave, to wade through the sea of black in their cloaks of grief. And as she ushered the last out the door, Anne saw the storm, another thick black blanket. But she threw her caution into it and ran to arrive breathless at her lover's door. His arms felt like everything that's ever been. Her king, his queen. She threw off her black, her passion broiled, but he held her back. I have to tell you, she said, catching the question in his stare, but Anne, beware. Jack said, you did it. A statement, a fact, and Anne couldn't act. But listen, she pleaded. His gaze turned to rock. I will not love a murderess. He slammed the door in her distress. As a knife sliced open the sky, it wept as Anne cried. And from inside the voice of Jack, just leave and never come back. He waited till the pounding of the door and the pouring of the storm had all but stopped. And as he sat, as still as stone, a picture of Anne seeped into his soul, and a slow realization started to grow, and he knew he'd dealt a terrible blow. Her flushed cheek, her swollen breast, her thickening middle beneath her dress. What Anne had to tell him he should have guessed, and so it was Jack's turn to go, to run to the farmhouse and search his empty rooms. Through the damp of the fields, through the dark of his fears, to the edge of the cliff. They say if you walk this stretch at dusk, with the wind coming from the east. You'll hear the soft mewl of a could-have-been child, and a grown man groan in grief.